Thank you. So I'm Chris Cagle. I'm EVP of Technology at AdTheorent. AdTheorent, for those of you who probably don't know, we're based out of New York City, and we're a mobile-first advertising network focusing primarily on the RTB space. I personally am from Pittsburgh. That's where we have our tech teams based out of. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the current innovations in programmatic advertising. So why would you choose a dynamic ad over static? It's pretty clear to most of us, but let me go through a couple good reasons. First, these ads are clearly more engaging. With all of the technology available nowadays, you can build in great animations, and these animations allow the ad to respond to user interactions such as swiping or the tilting of the phone using the gyroscope. In the example you see looping behind me, it's a new ad unit that we recently created at AdTheorent called the Mindset Survey. Interesting about that, it doesn't really look like an ad. That's the whole point of it. You can see there's really not too much. I don't know why that's not moving. It was moving. Let me go back, see if we get the animation going again. It was running. I know it was. But either way, it's an ad, but doesn't really look like an ad. We do this to sort of combat ad blindness. We combat it with the animations that were in there, and we don't actually ask for a click either, which is maybe a little odd for an ad. We just asked the user, I don't know if you saw it before, it went still on me, but it was asking a simple question. It was a yes or no question, a binary answer. We just asked the user to swipe right or swipe left, and what that was doing for us is sending our servers back data.
Why does that not look like an ad? It looks like a game when it's motion.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit, if you could have seen, it wasn't branded for the particular advertiser. But the whole point of this was to gather survey responses. Most brand surveys, you have to click out and go to a form. This was a much more simplified version of that. Another reason why you'd use dynamic over static, obviously much more eye-catching. Web users much more likely to pay attention to an ad. It tells them that they're so many miles away from a Lowe's, as opposed to just a boring, static, non-moving Lowe's ad. In the two examples that I'm showing here, we use the location data coming from the incoming ad request to display things like the fact that they are 1.25 miles away from a grand opening Lowe's, or the fact that it's 75 and windy in New York City, so they need to buy a new coat. Another one that's not listed here is those retargeting ads that we're all seeing everywhere, it seems. You go to Amazon, you look at it for a pair of shoes, that pair of shoes follows you around everywhere. That's just a dynamic ad working with data. So what goes into building a dynamic ad? Well, more or less, it's just a full web page. It's not a snippet of code, it's just a full web page, and it has all the attributes that you would think a web page typically has. It has JavaScript and it has images. That JavaScript, it's there for the animations like you saw earlier. It's also used to serve the ad. You can't really take a mobile web page and serve it as an ad across multiple networks, so we wrap that in JavaScript. One, to serve it, but two, to also take care of, or to take advantage of the MRAID framework, so those ads can be served in an app environment. With images, I personally try to limit the amount of images in any of the ads that I build. They're heavy, they slow down render time, and a lot of times I can usually just do that with code or CSS. It's always better that way to limit the amount of ads. No one wants a slow ad taking forever to load. Lastly here, I have the API listed. So an API, it's kind of a generalized term here, but I'm talking about RSS feeds, an advertiser's REST API, or something that's custom built by my team. An API is one of the few external calls that I believe are okay for a dynamic ad. Most of the time, you'd want to keep all those assets close and internal to the server that's serving this ad. But this API is where the dynamic data lives. This data can be queried based on either user information that you're able to gather or the passed-in data into the ad tag. So for example, you can grab user segments based on the cookie ID you're able to grab. Or you can determine the weather based on a zip code, like on the ad, the Nike ad that I showed previously. Or you can show the distance between point A and point B based on a latitude and longitude point. A lot of those all need APIs. That's not necessary, but if you're going to create a real engaging ad, you're going to need data like that. So, all right, so now we've talked about building an ad, and we've talked about why you want to build an ad, but why do advertisers want it? Well, it's better optimization. Dynamic ads provide much better metrics than the standard click-through rate, or CTR. I have a deep-seated hatred for the CTR metric because my company started out as mobile, and with mobile, there are so many poor ad placements across the web that they inevitably create misclicks everywhere. These misclicks are so rampant and can severely skew optimizations towards people with fat fingers, which no advertiser wants. An advertiser wants people who are engaged with these ads and not just accidentally clicking on it because it was put in a bad spot. So how do we optimize, or how do we remove the effect of these misclicks on our optimizations? Well, dynamic ads actually are a perfect medium for that. If built the right way, they're going to allow advertisers and their networks, such as AdTheorent, to optimize based on ad engagement rather than just the standard click. Now, this is because, obviously, an end user does not perform multiple engagements by accident, like you would with a fat finger click. So how do you track these ads? How do you track these engagements? The easiest route, and this is getting a little technical, which is probably good for this group, if you're working with an ad network, hopefully that ad network has a unique ad impression ID. That ad impression ID should be served, or if the ad network is integrated tightly with the ad that's being created, the best way to do it is to pass in the impression ID to that ad and have all the engagements pass it right back. With those impression IDs that you've gathered from all the engagements, you can go back to the originating ad impression data and get all kind of information like location, device ID, the publisher of the app that it's being served on, the website URL that it's being served on. I'm in the RTB space, and there are hundreds of data points that you can grab. I'm just listing a couple here. This data can be used to gain very useful insights on those people who are engaging with the ads and allow you to build optimization models. That's exactly what AdTheorent does. We feed in all that impression data that generated these engagements, and we send it into our predictive engine. And output from that engine are models that are looking for the propensity for other people that are going to engage. Now, what if you don't have a tight integration with the ad network, right? So an ad was created by a different company, or you don't have the ability to make technical changes within the ad network. What can you do? Well, there's third-party tracking software out there. This is not a sales presentation, I swear, but AdTheorent created a product called Barometric. Barometric is essentially a third-party tracking software. And just to give you an idea on how third-party tracking would work, Barometric will sit as a pixel, or any third-party tracking service will sit as a pixel on the impression, and then those other pixels will just be placed into the ad unit. You're not passing data back and forth. That's actually the problem we're trying to solve by placing these pixels in there. So each pixel attempts to grab as many different IDs as possible in order to eventually attribute those engagements back to the originating impression. Now, I said different IDs. We're talking about mobile here today. That's my forte. Mobile doesn't work the same way as it does in desktop, right? Desktop has a cookie, and that's essentially it. On mobile, we're not that lucky. We have different OSs, different environments, different restrictions on those environments. So because of that, inside mobile, we try to grab as many IDs as possible. And those IDs fall into a couple different buckets. First, deterministic. Deterministic ID is something like a cookie ID or an IDFA, for those of you who may not know what an IDFA is. It's an Apple device ID. Google has one as well. It's the Google Advertising ID. And deterministic ID doesn't necessarily change. It can, but if you see it again, you know for a fact it's the same person. If that isn't there, you can fall down to what I like to call probabilistic ID. Probabilistic ID is not 100% accurate, although you can put in restrictions and filters to what goes into that probabilistic ID to make it as accurate as possible. But probabilistic ID, you just grab a bunch of meta information, session information, browser information that's all anonymous, and we're talking user agent, right? Nothing that's user specific, and sort of hash that together into a probabilistic ID. That is captured on the impression as well as the engagement. Whenever you have all of these engagements and impressions sitting there, you're going to hopefully be able to tie those engagements back to the originating impression via one of these two IDs. Now, dynamic ads are web pages, right? Everyone has an app on their phone. You're going to need a device graph if you're going to be using a third-party tracking solution. That tracking solution has to have a device graph. A device graph is used to tie IDs from different environments together, right? So for instance, you have an IDFA in an app, but you can't get an IDFA on mobile web. And so inside mobile web, you can get a cookie, but you can't get that cookie inside an app. And a device graph solves that problem for you and allows you to tie those two IDs together into the same device. So that's all I have for you today. I don't usually do talks like this, but if you have, I hope you've all learned something about what goes into building dynamic ads and how we can use their data to be more useful in optimizations. If you have questions on any of this stuff, I'll be around for a little bit. I'll be happy to talk your ear off. Thank you.